what we're trying to do is to produce a product that is better quality than what can be grown in traditional farming, with better environmental and social inputs and outputs. We definitely had the passion and the enthusiasm for what we wanted to do with the business, but we had to shape that into a compelling story for investors. We have reached out to almost 200 investors, and I can count on one hand the number of calls and meetings that I've had with women, let alone women of colour or any other kind of diversity metric.
Hello, Kate. Welcome. I'm delighted to have you here today so we can talk about GrowUp and your story, your company GrowUp, and your story about how you started it and what happened in the beginning and what challenges you've encountered, because I know you've had some, and then how you're dealing with them and what you want to do in the future. So
cool. Well, I'll just start by telling you a little bit about myself. So my name's Kate, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of GrowUp Urban Farms. And we build controlled environment production farms, so totally indoor, controlling all aspects of the production. You might have heard of them called vertical farms. We use hydroponic technology. We've also done aquaponics before. And the idea is that by completely controlling the environment like that, you can grow in a much more resource efficient way. You're very resilient to climate change. And ultimately what we're trying to do is to produce a product that is better quality than what can be grown in traditional farming, with better environmental and social inputs and outputs. So just some small goals. We set the company up about 5 years ago, and I don't come from a farming background. I grew up in London, and I've always been interested in food and sustainability. But before I started the company, I was working for IBM as a management consultant, and that was good. I used to do big IT implementation projects for big corporate clients, and it was interesting, and I would do things like the strategy and the communications plan and the project management, and I did enjoy that, but I mostly felt like I was helping big companies make more money, and it wasn't terribly soul fulfilling. So I decided to take a sabbatical, and I went to do a master's at Imperial College in environmental technology and business. And I think when I did that course, I thought, oh, well, this will enable me to go into sustainability consulting or some kind of corporate sustainability job. And actually, before I did the master's program, which was a year, the summer before, I took part in a program called Climate KIC. Which is where we met. Is how we met.
Yes. About a number of years ago it was like...
So that was 2011.
Oh my God.
Yeah, sorry.
No, but I met you in 2012 then.
Yes,
because I moved here 6 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's true. So I became part of Climate KIC in 2011. I went on this summer school program that they had, and on that I came across the ideas of urban farming and aquaponics and hydroponics and vertical farming, and just got really interested in it, and I could really see how it made sense to start thinking about food production in a more circular way. And I guess I was excited by the fact that some of the technology had been around for a while, but nobody had cracked the business model yet. So people were growing food in these different ways, but nobody had worked out how do you scale that to become a business that can compete with traditional agriculture. Because the reality is that a lot of our agriculture these days happens at industrial scale.
Right.
So for me, it was always about, well, how do you scale up hydroponics and aquaponics and vertical farming to make that happen? So I kind of found out about all of that, and I did my master's, and I wrote my master's dissertation on the commercialization of urban farming in London. And my conclusion at the time was, actually, no one's commercialising this. There is no commercialisation. And it was quite interesting because what I was doing was looking at community projects that were trying to commercialise. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion that I came to is that actually community growing projects in cities are very different from how you commercially feed people in cities, and the two things are not really the same at all. Mm. And making one commercially viable when it started off as being a community project and trying to create something commercial that was also community driven, I thought was actually quite a difficult thing to achieve. So
because no one else had actually achieved it.
Yeah, I thought there was some fundamental mismatches to do with labour costs and production volumes and how to make all of that work, and that a lot of the projects were sort of not really factoring in their costs properly. So they were making money, but they were generating revenue by selling produce, but they were relying on volunteer labour.
Oh, okay.
So there's no economic model there. Right. That's not to say it's not a good thing for those projects to be doing those things, right. But it's not an
economically viable.
Yeah. So anyway, so I did my master's, and then I went back to my old job. I lasted for about 6 months before I realised that it just wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. And I was so excited and passionate about the thought of creating something different in the food production industry. And at the time I thought, well, it's actually relatively low risk for me to leave this job and go and try something else for a year, because the worst comes to the worst and I don't get anywhere after a year, I can probably just come back to IBM and pick up my consulting job. And so in the meantime, I'd met my business partner, Tom, and we'd been introduced by a mutual friend who knew we were both interested in the same thing, but Tom was coming at it from the growing point of view and interested in how you do the production bit, and I was interested in the business part. So that was quite a nice fit. And we I'd already decided to leave my job when we decided to start working together. It took Tom about another 6 months before he quit his job as well. And we were both working full time together.
In GrowUp.
And that was 5 years ago. And I guess, I can tell you a bit more about the journey that we've been on the past 5 years. We started off by building a small prototype, which was a shipping container with a greenhouse on top. And in the greenhouse, we had vertical growing columns, and downstairs in the shipping container, there was a fish tank. So it was a small system, but very visually exciting to show people how you can grow food using aquaponics. So we would take the wastewater from the fish farm, and we would use that as the nutrients for the plants, and the plants would take the nutrients out of the water, and the water would filter back down into the
sort of a proof of concept.
It was a proof of concept. It was a way of visualising it, of getting people interested and exciting. It wasn't a commercial model in itself, but just to get people interested and excited. And we actually did a Kickstarter campaign to fund that. We were one of the first companies to go on Kickstarter when it first moved to the UK. So at that stage, it was much more of a kind of inspirational project development platform. Now I think it's really a pre-purchase model for people, right? If you're using Kickstarter, it's because you've got a product and you want to not pre-purchase, pre-sell.
Pre-sell, right.
People are using Kickstarter now to pre-sell their products.
Right.
When we went on Kickstarter, it was really about getting people excited about what we were doing and getting them to come on the journey with us of developing that project. So we ran the Kickstarter project, and then we built the GrowUp box. And we used that to get some interest from restaurants and buyers around London to test the produce, and also to understand the operations and the technical side of things, and to understand the business model and what that would look like. And from having that box up and running, we started to work on the business plan for scaling the business. And that was when we met you, because at that point we were part of the Climate KIC Accelerator program.
You had just joined?
Yes. At the time when we built the box.
So you were one of how many companies that were in the Climate KIC Accelerator?
I think at the time we were probably around one of between 10 and 20. I actually can't remember, because it was quite early on
super early
in when the accelerator was running.
Yeah, I didn't think there were 20.
You don't think there were that many? Maybe there were fewer.
Yeah.
And so we joined phase 1 of the accelerator, and there were 3 phases. And so the idea was to help us get to be investment ready.
Right.
So it was to help us to develop a business plan, but also develop the strategy to implement that plan and deliver it.
Right. And I remember the first time that you and Tom got up to pitch.
Oh my God, you destroyed us. Absolutely destroyed us.
But at first,
yes,
I sort of constructively criticized what was missing and what needed to go, when it needed to be improved. And the last thing I think I did was the delivery, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's amazing. Obviously, if I look back on how we were presenting things back then versus what we do now, obviously part of it is to do with time and business and development. But I remember at the time, what we were doing is we would stand up and pitch together, the two of us.
I know.
And I don't know if it was you or somebody else at the time said, quite early on said to us, guys, what you're doing is great if you want to be Blue Peter presenters.
That wasn't me, but I said,
because you might not have got the Blue Peter reference. It must have been someone English who said that. Great if you want to be Blue Peter children's television presenters. But if you're pitching your business to investors,
right.
it's too distracting having two of you. Just one of you get up there, tell the story.
Because I did say you can't do two either.
Yeah.
But I didn't use the blue Peter. Right?
But it was a good...
Because I didn't know. I don't know what that was. I gather it's a children's program.
It's a children's TV show. It's like a very educational... It's been around... I think it was the first... for children, one of the first for children programs commissioned by the BBC.
Oh yeah,
so it's been around for decades and decades. And it has been suggested to me that in an alternative career, I would make a good Blue Peter presenter. You need to be very enthusiastic,
right.
But it's also educational and
right.
It's where the phrase "here's one I made earlier" comes from. I don't know if you know.
No.
So they would teach you how to do these models, and they would show you everything, and then they'd like bring out a fully made one and say, "Here's one I made earlier." Anyway, that's a computer side. So yeah, so we had at that stage we definitely had the passion and the enthusiasm for what we wanted to do with the business, but we had to shape that into a compelling story for investors.
Right. So you had the first sort of 2 days with me with a number of other companies, but then we came a second time. We came back. I mean, you were actually preparing to get approved to go to the next phase of the 3 phases.
So
of
actually,
the accelerator.
So there were several stages of the accelerator where we were developing the pitch, and we also got through to the Climate KIC European venture competition
for all of Europe.
So there was that as well, and we also then
you won the UK one.
We won the UK one, and this was in 2014, and I can't quite remember all of the timing wise, but when we built the business plan working with Climate KIC, and we then went out to go and raise investment. We then also got accepted into a competition called the Big Energy Idea that was being run by Centrica, and we also had to pitch for that. And so I remember part of the work we did with you was to prepare for that pitch. And actually it was that pitch, and it was doing that work with you and for that pitch that led us to raise our first significant investment, which was $1 million.
Yeah.
And we were able to then take that money and build our first farm.
Yeah, right. So what was it in the pitch? What sort of did you highlight in the pitch that allowed them to understand the value of what you were doing?
I think a big part of it was about telling a story and having a narrative, not just about flashing up some slides that had some numbers on. And we still always tell other people when we see other people's pitch decks, can I swear? Yeah. We still tell other people, like, oh, you can't put that up there. That's a dog shit slide. Beth Susanne would call that a dog shit slide. You can't use that. And that's really stuck with me, that it's no good having a slide that's just got loads of logos stuck up on it. It doesn't actually add anything to your story.
Right.
Or,
but I actually didn't use that phrase. I said dog patch.
Somehow in our head, in Tom and I's heads,
it was a dog patch.
It has become Beth Susanne would call that a dog shit slide. Of course, you would never swear like that. That's really funny.
I know.
Well, but
they got it.
They got it, and we that really stuck with us. And so the story and the narrative is incredibly important. Setting out what the problem is up front, and that again, I really has always stuck with us, and I notice it particularly now if I see other people present or pitch. I can get 2 or 3 minutes in, and 2 things I'd be like, I actually don't know what problem you're solving, and I don't really know what your product or service is.
There you go.
So it's about being really clear on here's what the problem is, and here is how we are solving it.
Right.
And those things sound so straightforward.
So simple, but it's very hard to do, right?
It's really hard to do.
And majority of people aren't good at doing that initially.
Yeah.
From my experience, too.
Yeah.
Of the over 2,224 companies that I've coached.
Just a casual. How many? 2,224
in the last 6.5 years since I've moved to Europe alone. That's
Yeah, but I think you're right. It's very simple and yet very difficult to do well. And in a way, there's I think working with you, what we realise is there's 2 steps to it. First of all, you've got to get your head around being able to do that, and then the second step is having exactly the right words with which to do it.
Right.
Because one of the things that has stayed with me from when we did those first 2 days of training with you is that it doesn't matter whether you're giving a 30-second pitch, a 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute. You basically have to know the whole thing word for word off by heart, but you have to be able to say it like you're... it's like it's natural conversation.
It's spontaneous.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Well, it's true. It's true. And it's, and it has really stuck with me. And it's a really, I think, such an important skill to have when you're trying to sell your business.
Right. Because it gets you the results that you deserve and desire much more quickly that way. In general, it really does. And specifically, if you're really honing your pitch and you're saying exactly what you need to say and you understand what not to say, that's one of the key things. Is many people put in way too many details about what they're doing and they go off at a tangent. And you have to really understand what not to say and then how you deliver the message. See, you're very passionate and compelling when you talk. That's why they're probably telling you about this. What's the name of it? The little children's program?
Blue Peter.
Blue Peter. Blue Peter. So, because, in order to entertain children, you have to be compelling, you have to be passionate, you have to be larger than life, right? So, and you have that ability. And when you're presenting, you need to tap into your own authentic voice that allows you to do that.
Yes.
And so that's what you're doing. Because Tom, your partner, has a very different manner. And that's part of the reason why it's not advantageous for you to pitch within 5 minutes in a short pitch together, because it's very distracting to go from his style,
2 different styles,
to yours.
Yeah.
It's very distracting. So it needs to be just the message. How you convey the message needs to be sort of a seamless, similar thing, so that you don't get distracted by shifting how it's delivered.
And I also remember you when we did that pitch training with you the first 2 days for Climate KIC. It was the first time I'd really learnt about the whole sort of Silicon Valley startup approach, because obviously that was the background that you were coming from, and this idea that investors would sit there at events and listen to 20, 30, 40 startups just pitching one after another after another after another.
That's right.
And that it is as much about how you make your story stand out and be interesting and exciting and seamless as it is how good your product is. Because actually, at the point at which they're listening to you pitch, it's very unusual that they would just turn around and be like, "Yeah, I love it. Here's the money."
That's right.
But what you want to do is you want to open the conversation with them.
Exactly.
So we really focused on how we could use our pitch to
open that conversation. Yeah. That's exactly right. You want to be able to get the meeting.
Yeah.
You don't want them to say, "I want to talk to you more about that." And you need to stand out for them to say yes. And because they listen to so many startups, and the fact is that so many startups, their technology, service, or product, there's just millions of amazing technology services and products, but they want to understand what's important for them to hear, which is the problem and the solution, the market. Do you have traction? Do you have clients, etc.? How are you better than the competition? And your team. Your team is super important. So that's when you're presenting. If you're passionate about it, they have to click with you, because if you want to get them to invite you to have the meeting, but then when they give you the money, they're going to be involved with you for years.
Yeah, so you have to click.
Yeah. And so that's what you have to show them, is that someone that they want to engage with for years, which is actually interesting to bring to this point, because as a woman entrepreneur, like only 1 out of 10 companies gets funded generally. I mean, that's sort of generally. And 1 out of 10 of those is a woman, generally, if I remember my numbers correctly.
Yeah.
So being a woman, how has that affected you, in terms of when you're presenting, and you've got Tom there also, sometimes you don't. Do you think that there's been any different impact because you're female, or?
It's really interesting, because 2 years ago, if we'd have been having this conversation, what I would have told you is I get really frustrated when people ask me, what's it like to be a woman in business? And what's it like to be a woman entrepreneur? Because my answer to that is always, well, I don't know, because I've only ever been a woman in business. I've never been a man, so I can't possibly tell you what it's like to be a woman. It used to really annoy me, because I felt like people were kind of completely missing the point, even though I understood that there was some kind of conversation to be had there because of the statistics that you just quoted, right? And I think a couple of things in the last 2 years, the whole Me Too movement has really, and also the Me Too movement and the stuff in the UK around the gender pay gap,
right, and the US also,
and has really come to the forefront and has really changed some of that conversation. So I find now that I'm able to have much more meaningful conversations about this. Also, in the past 2 years, as you know, I've had a baby.
Yes.
So my position as a woman, I guess, has really kind of impacted on me as a human being, because I now have a baby to look after as well as the baby that is my business.
Right.
So I do, all of those things are really at the forefront of my head at the moment. On the one hand, thinking about making yourself seen and capturing people's attention, I think it's always been a great thing for the business and for me that we can go along to these pitching events and I will often be the only woman pitching. Right. And that's a good thing, because they're more likely to remember me than they are the 9 other white men who are standing up there and pitching their app.
Right. I know. I know. So that's the positive.
So that's the positive. The challenging part of it,
not as positive.
Not as positive. The challenging part is, for the fundraise that we're doing at the moment, we have reached out to almost 200 investors or funds, or we've done a huge amount of groundwork. Of those people we've reached out to, we've maybe had, 50 contact points, I would say, like where we've got beyond an email, we've had a call or a meeting, what have you. And I can count on one hand the number of calls and meetings that I've had with women, let alone women of colour or any other kind of diversity metric.
Right.
And after a certain point, it's hard not to be constantly reminded when you go into a room that you're different from the people that you're sat in a room with.
Right.
And, people buy people. That's how
right.
people...
There's a mirror thing.
There's a mirror thing.
Yes,
so people buy people who are like them.
That's the point of the mirror.
Because they can relate to them.
Right.
And so there comes a point where you start to question, well, I'm a woman... I'm a young woman, youngish still,
Still young.
with a baby, running my own business that's an impact business, is not purely commercially driven. Like all of these things that make up who I am and who the business is, I rarely get to have a mirror. I rarely get that mirrored back in an investor.
Right.
And I think that lack of diversity in the investment community can only contribute to the lack of diversity in the types of people who are successfully raising money and scaling their businesses.
That's right. There's a direct correlation.
There's got to be a direct correlation.
There is a direct correlation. And I've told you about these 2,224 companies.
How many of them were led by women?
So way less than 10%. Way less than 10%. So when you say you're the only woman, when I'm coaching all these companies, many times I'm the only woman in the room, but sometimes when I'm working with universities, there's more women, because I work with researchers and scientists, like at the University of Utrecht, and they're trying for ERC grants, our European Research Council grants, to get funding from 750,000 up to 2 million euros, and so that's more even. And then I was just in Paris working with biotech companies in Paris, and it was close to 50-50.
That's pretty cool.
And I it's interesting, because sometimes in the sciences that's what happens when and specifically in biotech, I've come across more women. Otherwise, no, it's just there's just very, very few women. It's really, really unusual to come across women. And the venture capitalists that I've been preparing all my clients to go pitch to, I go and I'm there when they pitch many times, and I've coached VC firms, etc. And, if the VC firm, if there's a woman or two in the firm, that's also unusual. And I find that, this is going to sound like a gross generalization, but, venture capitalists in general have a reputation for being quite critical and very harsh, right? And when their critique of people, the Silicon Valley model is extremely harsh, right?
Yeah.
And then in Europe, they're not as harsh here in terms of their feedback, et cetera. They can be occasionally. But I find that a lot of women are harder on other women
Interesting.
than men are sometimes. So VC women, I've heard them be not all of them, but occasionally that happens. So there needs to be some sort of evening out or balance brought to it to encourage more women to start.
Yeah, I would agree.
To start businesses and to come into the programs that are available. Because in Europe, there's so many wonderful acceleration and incubation programs available that are funded by the government, which helps in the way it doesn't. We don't have that in Silicon Valley, so they don't have government money. So in Europe, you do. So you have a combination of government money. They pay to bring in mentors and experts.
Yeah.
Like I'm one of the people they pay to bring in to help them. So people who actually know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that you can actually.
And you increase your chances of success that way.
That's right.
For the companies.
Right. And then you also have interchange with EU programs with industry, where you can have industrial internships or partnerships, or visit different companies to sort of see how they're structured, and then have mentors and advisors, and it's really great.
But I suppose there's got to be a way, as you say, of increasing, and it's not just women. It's a bigger diversity challenge, I think.
It is. It's not just women. Right.
Of diversifying the portfolio of people who are wanting to set up their own businesses and who have the capability to make that succeed.
Right.
Because also I really fundamentally believe that diversity increases your chances of success.
Oh, I mean, all the research shows that, proves it.
So if we want to create a more successful economy based on, positive impact, both environmentally and socially, we have to have a wider range of people solving those problems. And at the moment, I think that's a big missing link.
I agree totally.
In the startup and investment world.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah. There is a groundswell, as you said, from the Me Too movement of women's entrepreneurial conferences, meetings, etc. Starting to sort of, I see them popping up all over.
So it is happening, and I have some concerns about that. So first of all, I'm not sure that just being women is enough of a common thread to help a group of people advance.
I agree.
I'm also then a bit concerned about creating a second layer of elitist structure, like if you've got men, from being a boys' club to somehow being a women's club. The thing that also really frustrates me is when you do see profiles of successful women entrepreneurs, they're almost always doing, not almost always, but in the majority of cases, they're doing businesses that are directed at women. Mm-hmm. They're fashion companies,
right,
or lifestyle companies.
Right.
They're not solving the big challenges that need solving in our society.
Right.
Like, we should not be leaving those to men anymore to sort out.
Right.
We need women to sort those problems out. We need more diverse pools of people to sort those problems out.
Right.
And I don't see enough of that happening.
Well, I think that's true, and I work with the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, EIT Climate KIC, where we met, but also with the Health KIC and the Raw Materials KIC, and the thing about it is, in the food KIC, that I see the women that I do see are involved in addressing some of the major problems of society, the global challenges. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with food and growing food in a sustainable way, an accessible, sustainable way for urban populations. But another one for the Climate KIC, she was developing fuel cells that were. She's a scientist developing fuel cells that sort of can really, with hydrogen, with hydrogen, that can actually sort of save energy and fuel energy in a way that's much more sustainable. And the thing is that I see, and the scientists that I see, they're men and women, etc. Mm-hmm. So the women that I see they're not in the fashion industry, because the people that I help are, I don't deal with, I guess I don't have that many people in that sort of industry. So it's, ag tech, fintech,
I think that's really important. That's where, as I said, that's where the fundamental shifts are going to happen.
So I was thinking that it's all there. It's just a matter of sort of funneling women into those more.
Yeah, I think so.
I was actually like you almost all my life until just very, very recently, where I never liked it when people ask me a question about being the only woman, or I don't even think of myself that way. I just do my work and I'm going out there and doing everything. But then recently also, because it's been raised up in sort of the global consciousness of the West and the East, but I've sort of actually taken more notice that they're, because honestly, I just didn't even, I'm coaching startups, I'm not thinking about whether they're a woman or a man, I'm just helping these people to sort of get their value appreciated in the world so they can get the outcomes that because people that I coach are doing good in the world, right? It really matters. And it's the thing I said earlier to someone else was that, I'm trying to help as many people as possible, do as much good as possible for as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So that's by me helping all these companies that it's happening. But it's the inequality is there. And I'm not sure how I personally can address the inequality, but it's just by doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think, and by focusing on helping those businesses who are trying to have that impact, that's, rather than the, the
So you can model having an impact as a woman, as a human being, and who happens to be a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's you also, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
That's good. So now, where are you with your business now?
So where we're at is, I mentioned that we raised this investment, so that was back in 2014, to build a commercial prototype farm. And we built that farm. We ran it for 2.5 years in a warehouse in London, and it was the UK's first commercial aquaponic vertical farm. It was very exciting. It was a fantastic facility. We could produce around 20 tons of salads and 4 tons of fish per year. So,
wow.
Quite large numbers, although nothing compared to the size of the market. But that system was a commercial prototype. There were lots of great things about it, but like lots of prototypes, there were things about it that didn't work. And ultimately, after 2.5 years of operations, we decided that it wasn't economically sensible for us to keep it running anymore. It was costing too much money. We couldn't get it to break even under the circumstances that it had been built and was being operated. So we made the decision to close it down, which was really difficult because it meant I had to let all of my staff go.
Yeah.
And also because we went from having this really fantastic facility that everybody loved and was really enthusiastic about to not having any production up and running. So that was very difficult. That was also combined with having a baby who was under 1 and, trying to juggle all of those things as well. So 2017 was a very difficult year for me. But actually, by closing down that facility, what it really allowed Tom, my business partner, and I to do was to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what have we learned over the last 4 years, 4.5 years? What assumptions are still true? What doesn't hold anymore? Where do we really want to take the business? Are we still aligned as a team about what we want to do?
Right.
And actually we realised that yes, we were, and that fundamentally what still mattered for us was finding out how we could scale this to industrial scale.
Right. So what were the key things that you worked well that you can now want to continue with, and what were the key things that you found that didn't work well that caused you to shut it down?
So I think
and how would you set it up differently?
So the things that worked well were really focusing on product quality and understanding how to consistently produce something that was going to delight your customers. I mean, that applies in every business, right? But that's what we learned. And the other thing that we learned was that our expertise and the place that we were really building our reputation and our expertise around was operational knowledge. So we had developed a lot of processes and procedures that would optimize our production and therefore improve our yields and reduce our costs, which again, sounds really straightforward stuff, but it was really important.
Yeah.
And so what we realized was that's where we wanted to focus our attention. The scale that we were operating at didn't work. So
wasn't big enough.
Well, on the one hand, it wasn't big enough, so we couldn't bring down our cost of production. On the other hand, it was too big, so it meant our fixed costs were too high.
Yeah.
So we was just at the wrong scale. We were selling to the wrong customers. So we were doing a lot of direct to restaurant sales, And actually that was a very expensive market to service, and it was going to top out because the number of restaurants that you can directly serve is directly related to how many vans and drivers you have to fulfill those orders. And we just couldn't go to the scale that we wanted to with what we had. So we were doing the wrong products to the wrong customers, and we were growing at the wrong scale. So what we realised that we needed to do was to scale up both our operations and the team. So on the team side of things, we realised that actually Tom and I had a lot of day-to-day operational experience in this business, but we didn't have the previous commercial expertise from a financial point of view or a commercial sales point of view to scale the business. So we needed to bring in more people to help us with that. And on the operations side of things, we needed to adjust what we were doing so that it could really compete economically with traditional agriculture. And that meant a couple of things. So the first thing that meant was dropping the urban. So although the company's called GrowUp Urban Farms, actually what we realised is, in this country at least, and for the time being, it's not commercially viable to try and be doing your growing in the city. Okay. We need to be close to the city, but actually rather than being close to the end consumer, we need to be close to the logistics and distribution networks and hubs that feed into the city. We also need to be co-located with renewable energy generation, because that's a huge cost for us, that we need to be able to buy wholesale energy. The reality is, if you want to be next to an anaerobic digester or a biomass burner, those aren't going to be in the city centre, they're going to be out and about. So really understanding how to make our business work commercially within the right ecosystem, and then making sure we have the right technology partners on board to work with, and making sure that we were focused on the right product still, which is one of the things that we were doing well, focusing on product quality, but we weren't quite growing the right thing. And then obviously the thing that wraps around all of that is raising the investment to make all of that happen. Which is what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, so you're raising investment now. And so how much money are you looking for?
We're actually doing two kinds of raising at the same time. So we're raising $750,000. I guess it's kind of pre-Series A. It's not seed because we've done that already, but we're not quite at Series A because we don't have the production up and running anymore to be considered revenue generating. So we're raising £750,000 for that, and that is to resource the team, do some branding and marketing work, help us work on the design of the next farm, and also to build an R&D facility. And then at the same time, in parallel to that, we're also looking to raise the money that we need, the asset financing that we need to actually build that first industrial scale farm. And that's around 13 to 14 million pounds per farm. And we want to build out a portfolio of 6 or 7 farms over the next 5 years.
Right. Okay. So the 750,000 gets you to the point where you can work while you're building all that. You can work to raise them 13, 14.
And we can get that first farm commissioned as well.
Right. So, the first farm commissioned. And so where logistically, where would you be putting your first farm? Do you know?
So we're looking at sites, a couple of sites across the UK. The key thing for us is to be co-located with renewable energy generation
and distribution,
and then to be able to tie into those distribution networks. So outside of London, but accessible to London, but also accessible to other cities as well. And then what we're trying to do is, with that next farm, to create a cookie cutter model that we can then replicate in other places, in other locations across the UK, and hopefully then globally.
Right. And so is that your sort of 5-year plan, is to go global in 5 years? You want to sort of get, how many of how many of you want 6 different?
So we would see the first 6 farms being in the UK, I think.
Over what time period?
Over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
for
5 to 10.
Yeah. So it's a few more farms when you get up to 10 years. But then I think once we've nailed that model of what it looks like that you can replicate, then we've got the opportunity to expand internationally by partnering with people who can deliver that replication in other places.
So do you have the technical people in place? You said you identified 2 key roles that you need to have. One was the technical, and the other one was, you said earlier, don't remember, but it'll come back to me. But so you aren't in the process of looking for them or hiring them yet. You have to get the funding first, or do you identify them first to help you get the funding?
Yeah, a bit of both. So on the technical side of things, we have a technical partner company that we work with. So they own the technology. We know best how to sort of operate it and deploy it. And that's led by Tom, my business partner. So he runs all the technical side of the business and I run the business side of the business. We've found and have started working with a key financials person and a key commercials person in terms of the sales. And one of the things we're raising money for is to bring them on board. And then the resourcing of the business kind of scales as we build more farms. So we'll be able to get some efficiencies by operating them as a portfolio. So we'll have some centralized functions in the business. And then at each farm level is where the sort of operational staff will work.
So if you could have an ask right now, what do you need?
Oh, I'd like £750,000, please.
Yeah. And you need it by
the end of the year. We get to close the round by the end of the year. I mean, I'm going on holiday in 2 weeks, so ideally I'd like it within 2 weeks. But I'm more realistic than that.
So that's what we'll have to see what we can do.
Yeah. Thanks, Beth.
And do you have any of the $750,000? Do you have any of it promised or sort of on the road to being promised? Or?
Yeah. So we have a soft commitment of $250,000 from a strategic investor, and we won't take that money from them unless we can raise the rest of the round, because we need all of the money to achieve what we want to achieve. Right. So they're kind of sitting there waiting, and they want to see us raise the rest of the money and bring some other investors to the table to do the round as well.
Okay. Well, I wish you well with that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, because I we've known each other quite a few years.
Yeah, really.
And I've seen you go through all these different phases, and it's just been amazing to see when the farm was up and running, and then to see when you decided that it wasn't commercially viable. Then you had your little boy, who's adorable, and
he's a big fan of you.
Yeah, I know. It's a mutual adoration society between him and me. And then now that you've sort of reframed it. In Silicon Valley, it's not expected that you have to have the first time you try something that has to be successful, because they understand that not all, 90% of things fail at the first time around. But it's not a failure in the terms of not learning. It's basically, you come out of it, you and Tom, much more aware and capable of running a successful
I think so. I definitely think so. But it has been interesting because certainly the mentality in Europe and in the UK is not necessarily the same as in the US. And I have had conversations with investors where they've said to me, we really love this, but it's just such a shame that you don't still have the farm in London up and running. That would really help. I'm like, well, no, it wouldn't. If we still had that farm up and running, the business would have gone into administration.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that, and if you don't understand the difference between...
Then you're not the right investor.
Between having a prototype and having it work right, then you're not the right investor.
Right, that's right, yeah.
So the mentality is slightly different, that people still see it as, it didn't work, and therefore you're in a worse place than you were before, whereas I completely agree with you. We're in such a stronger position than we were. We've got more operational and industry knowledge than anyone else doing this in the UK.
Right.
And we've also, had to make some really difficult decisions in our business that have created some internal resilience that means we'll be able to do things better going forward.
That's right. Absolutely. So I wish you well with all of that. Thank you so much.